When kids don't play, they grow up without imagination. Then it's all small talk and awkward weather chats. Good thing Gushers, Fruit by the Foot, and Fruit Roll-Ups are made to be played with. You better be playing.
Say hello to the new iced horchata shaken espresso from Starbucks. This handcrafted espresso drink with hints of cinnamon and vanilla is shaken with ice and oat milk to create the perfect summer sip. Available for a limited time at Starbucks.
Put us in a box. Go ahead. That just gives us something to break out of. Because the next generation 2025 GMC Terrain Elevation is raising the standard of what comes standard. As far as expectations go, why meet them when you can shatter them? What we choose to challenge, we challenge completely. We are professional grade. Visit gmc.com to learn more.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. It is 2019 in the Belleville neighborhood of Paris, and Anna, whose husband has just relocated to England for work, has run into a new neighbor in her early 20s, Clémentine. After a brief interaction, the lives of these two women will become intertwined in ways that would be impossible for either to have imagined. It is 1972, and Henry and Florence are inhabiting what will eventually become Anna's apartment, and they live in a time of revolution in the aftershocks of the 1968 student protests in Paris, with Florence under the spell of a controversial psychoanalyst whose seminars are the talk of Paris's intellectual scene. Moving between these time periods and between the lives of women at various tipping points in their relationships, Lauren Elkin's novel Scaffolding is a philosophical narrative that revels in desire between men and women, women and women, and in the broader longing to know someone fully, intimately, without fear or hesitation. Centered around one Parisian apartment at two very different moments in the city's history, Scaffolding probes the fundamental question of how we carry desire through a life shaped by limits on how and for whom we can express that desire. Along the way, questions of feminism as a bulwark against violence against women in the 20th and 21st centuries are run through a masterclass in psychoanalysis by Jacques Lacan, filtering through the language of each character in different ways. Called by the observer both erudite and horny, Scaffolding chips away at the veneer of social expectations in a novel that wants more and more exposed down to the studs. Lauren Elkin is the author of Art Monsters and Flâneuse, a New York Times Book Review notable book and a finalist for the PEN Diamonstein-Spielvogel Award for the Art of the Essay. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times, Le Monde, Frieze, and the Times Literary Supplement, among others. A native New Yorker, Elkin lived in Paris for 20 years and now resides in London. Welcome to Burned by Books, Lauren.
Oh, hi, Chris. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks for that beautiful description of the novel.
Well, it's a beautiful novel and one that I found just made me think so much about so many different things while at the same time making me fall in love with these various characters at different moments in time and in their lives. And Scaffolding moves between 2019, just before the pandemic, and 1972 in a Paris, as I said, that's really recovering and adapting in some ways to the 1968 protests. What was important about these two moments in French society, and how does the present of the novel act as a scaffolding for the past in the organization of the sections of the book?
Well, so when I first started writing this book many, many years ago, it was 2007, I was working on my PhD, which I did jointly between the Graduate Center in New York and the Université de Paris 7. And I was writing on Elizabeth Bowen and doing kind of Lacanian Kristavian readings of some of her 1930s novels. From the novel that it was sort of closest to my heart in general, and specifically in that project in my PhD, was her 1935 novel, The House in Paris, which is structured in 3 parts. Parts 1 and 3 are set in the present day, and part 2 bends back 10 years previously to look at the events that sort of set in motion and created the situation that we see in the present day sections. So I was really struck by that as a structure for a novel. And I thought quite cheekily, like, what if I borrow that, update it, do it not as like a discrete house in Paris, but an apartment building in Paris. So I was also a big like Georges Perec freak and a big fan of Une Nolade pour Bouillie, which is another one of these Parisian apartment building novels. What if we like bring it up to the present day and try to understand the ways in which different moments in French history can kind of speak to one another? And another big part of what was happening at the time when I was starting the novel was it was the 40th anniversary of the 1968 events, as they call them, the May 1968 protests.
Oh, they call them the event.
Yeah, les événements. And so, every time there's an anniversary for May 1968, the French papers are full of people speculating, that it was all like for naught, like it didn't do anything, didn't change anything. All these people who were young kids out on the barricades and throwing paving stones, they just kind of assimilated and became comfortable, like middle class bourgeois people. And there's a really interesting moment in the Bowen novel where the young woman whose rebellion is at the center of part 2 says something like, one longs for the revolution, but like if revolutions don't fail, they fail you. Like inevitably they repave the roads and everyone gets back to life as usual. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of proposition to update to May 68 and to look a few years later and see, how people had sort of metabolized it, how it was still alive in people's minds. Because, it's only 4 years earlier. It's still pretty recent. But I tend to be more interested in looking at major moments kind of obliquely. So not, dramatizing May 68 itself, but looking at its impact on people who were there and for whom it was very important. Another aspect of that is that when I was researching May 68 for the chapter in Flâneuse, it's about 68 and Mavis Gallant, I was really struck to find that there weren't very many accounts by women of what they did during the protests. All of the kind of like historiography and mythologizing of the period was either written by men or focusing on men. And so I know. So I was really interested to think about like what a woman's experience in 68 would have been and what she had hoped to get out of it and didn't get out of it or did.
Along with those vacillations between time periods, there are formal shifts between something like full page narration and pockets of single paragraphs or even one sentence pages dominated by the white space. How did that form take shape in the writing process, and how do you read it as its own kind of scaffolding?
That's a really great question. To be completely honest, the longer sections were the ones I wrote first when I was, under the more direct influence of Elizabeth Bowen, sort of more, I'm not going to say conventional novelist because I don't think she's a conventional novelist at all, but I was sort of writing with this idea in mind that a novel had to be made up of lots of words. And as I sort of, got older and matured as a writer, wrote that really strange book. I don't know if you came across it. I wrote a book on the bus, like on the
Yes, I'm dying to read that. It looks so fascinating. And Thera Mangusto has a good blurb on it, doesn't she?
She does. Bless her boots. Yeah. So that writing that book was a really good sort of exercise in like just sketching something briefly out on the page and letting it stand and then moving on. And that's something else I did in Art Monsters, which is a very fragmented text. And all the different kind of sections are sutured together with forward slashes. So there's a lot of like juxtapositions and sort of meanings that I hope are being produced by putting one thing next to another and not like explaining it to the reader, letting them sort of intuit a connection. So I think having come through writing those projects, I felt much more comfortable with letting an entire scene be like a sentence, or, just sketch out a few images of something that Anna's seen in Paris, or, conjuring up her state of mind through, reference to the fact that she doesn't want to shampoo her hair anymore or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I found it very compelling to have the variation in the formal play there, and it's interesting that one came first, but they work very well hand in hand, I think. To talk about the novel without Paris itself would be silly, but the architecture of a particular apartment in the Belleville neighborhood that comes to represent Paris beyond, what for Americans anyway is bakeries and grand edifices. And Belleville was once an enclave for German Jews fleeing or displaced from the Third Reich. But by the time Anna lives there, the character of the place has changed. The scaffolding on her building is part of a required refacing that apparently, is this true, happens all the time to Parisian buildings?
Yeah.
Amazing and expensive. But it comes to stand in for the destruction and obscuring of visible history of the people who once lived in these places. And I wonder if you could talk about that process of both understanding how it is that history is layered over, literally in architecture, but then also in narrative, but then also how your novel is really trying to uncover it again.
So something that I was thinking about with regard to Belleville, which how could you not, is the process of gentrification that's undergone over the last 20 years or something, but especially in the last, I want to say 10 to 15, whereby this neighborhood that, as you were just saying, it was really a kind of, it was originally a working class village on the outskirts of Paris, and then it was incorporated into Paris in the late 1860s. And there's all these funny cartoons, political cartoons that were sketched out at the time of these hicks standing on a hill going, "We're Parisian now." And so there's a real sense of Belleville having an identity of its own that was formed kind of in opposition to Paris as being not Paris. And it was this real kind of haven for wave after wave of immigrants fleeing whatever, largely initially in the late 19th century, Polish Jews fleeing persecution in Poland. And so it was a really poor place. And then eventually sort of, over the course of the 20th century, mid-20th century after the war, you see African communities moving in, North African communities. The Chinese community has really taken hold there. And it's this amazing kind of so when I was in high school, they said, we don't say melting pot anymore. We say salad bowl to talk about diversity in America.
Did they really say that? I missed the salad days, I guess.
Yeah, the salad days of Long Island in the 90s. But Belleville, you would think of as a salad bowl. It's not that the different ingredients are melting together in a melting pot. They really are distinct, but coexisting and making just a lovely, delicious salad of a neighborhood. But that all of that has been, sort of under threat, obviously, as wealthy, young, mostly white, creative people have been, as is always the case in Paris, priced out of the center, driven to the exterior parts of the city, and now they're actually, beyond the périphérique, out in the banlieue, in the suburbs. All of the young people that I know within Montreuil or Pantin and places like that. But anyway, so Belleville seemed like an interesting place to me to look at the different ways in which Paris itself has been refaced, has undergone all of these different revolutions, and been home in a sort of haven to different kinds of people at different moments. Yeah, so I tried to deal with that in the 1972 moment when the Parc de Belleville was being constructed and they had to tear down all of these really old, kind of ramshackle, insalubrious buildings that had been home to those same very poor Polish Jews that I mentioned before. And then the 2019 moment when there's posh wine bars and fancy creperies and things like that had never been there before.
It's interesting to read because I found the reading Scaffolding that I was learning a lot historically about Paris and some of its neighborhoods, but without the feel of a historical novel. And I wonder how you think about the sort of tropes of the historical novel and how you both clearly wanted to engage history without necessarily having the, for lack of a better word, the affect of a historical novel.
I really love historical novels, probably because I'm such a nerd researcher that I don't know. I just like being taken to other times and other places. And I appreciate, the research that a writer has done. I don't know. And I would like to write a historical novel myself. I have one kind of planned a little bit down the road. I don't know why I don't have a problem with the historical novel. I know it's not cool. Obviously, I'm thinking of the
cool. I'm just thinking that they carry a very particular kind of I can read 2 pages of a historical novel and clock it in that genre.
Yeah, I think. I've read so much Hilary Mantel. That's got me worried in a certain way. And also Elizabeth Bowen, who, for instance, her second novel, The Last September, is kind of a historical novel in the sense that it was written only 10 years after it was set. She wrote it in 29 and it's set in 1929, 1919. But she really is thinking of it as a journey back in time to another Ireland, another time and place when, it was all about to change. And I don't know, it's something about being a Bowen reader or something. I don't know. I can kind of, no, I don't even want to say that. I want to say I'm fascinated by thinking about history as just people who are living in the present moment, just like we are. They didn't know they were living in history. For them, their everyday was extremely contemporary and very modern all the time. And I think I just appreciate that and like to sort of imagine myself into their positions, into that feeling of contemporaneity.
Your local Benjamin Moore retailer is more than a paint expert. They're someone with paint in their soul, a sixth sense honed over decades. And if you have a question about paint, it's almost as if they can read your mind.
I sense you need a 2-inch angle brush for the trim in your family room. Regal selected an eggshell finish and directions to the post office.
Benjamin Moore paint is only sold at locally owned stores. Benjamin Moore. See the love.
On top of building this fake volcano for months, I give my daughter Smarty Pants vitamins to support her brain health. So her science fair project sounds more like and less like. And while I may say it's not a competition, of course it's a f***ing competition. Choose Smarty Pants vitamins to support your kid's brain health and save the science fair. Shop on Amazon, smartypantsvitamins.com, or at Target today.
Yeah, and maybe what I'm talking about is maybe more of a kind of not ham-fisted, but more, strongly asserted historicity. And how you're laying it out is, I think, what I like in both historical novels and in whatever, genre we want to apply to scaffolding, which is exactly what you're talking about. That it feels as though people are living their contemporaneous lives, but it just happens to be in a different historical period. Lauren, could I convince you to read a section from Scaffolding? And I just want to say before you do that I listened partially to Scaffolding and read most of it. But the part that I listened to, I was just utterly enchanted with your reading voice, as you are the narrator for the audiobook. And I think I can recommend just as highly the audiobook as I can the print book itself. But I'm wondering if you would read a section in which we get a sense of life in this apartment that's shared across time.
So this is a section from part 2 of her novel. So this is set in 1972. This is a husband and wife, Henri and Florence, who are living in the same apartment that the people who live there in 2019 inhabit. And this is from Henri's perspective, watching his wife, Florence, play the piano. Her favorite piece is Satie's Nocturnes, because they are played without time signatures or measures in what Satie called absolute time. The pieces seem quite structured to me, but what do I know? Florence loves them. Unstructured structure. There's an order to the movements, but it wasn't Satie who imposed it. They've been ordered this way by later musicians and academics. No beginning, middle, end. The variations aren't hierarchized. They come when they come. There's no resolution. Florence takes this to mean she can play them in any order and as many times as she likes. or she plays them through and then begins again with the first. I tell her if Satie wanted to end with that one, he would have included it as a coda to every movement. But she tells me she doesn't care what Satie wanted, and she doesn't think Satie cared either about being obeyed. In concerts, sometimes they play the piece everyone likes best again at the end as an encore, the one that sounds like a woman lifting her hair off the back of her neck and delicately pinning it up. No one really knows why the Nosiens are called the Nosiens. Some think he was referring to the palace of Minos at Knossos on Crete, to the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. Others think it's a reference to Gnostic religion. It seems he was inspired to compose the first one during a visit to the 1889 World's Fair in Paris, the one where the Eiffel Tower was introduced to the world. It was built to provide an archway or entryway to the fairgrounds, like a pointier Arc de Triomphe. Everybody was at the fair, from Annie Oakley and Buffalo Bill, hero of my childhood, to Gauguin, Van Gogh, and Debussy. But no one talks about Éric Satie, who was there too, and who went to hear the Romanian music. Thank goodness he did, or I wouldn't have these moments of bliss lying under the piano, listening to my wife play the song cycle inspired by the Romanians, grasping for a through line as she weaves a labyrinth of unmetered phrases. She gives me many threads. So many I don't know which one to trust to find my way out again. But at the center there is no mythic creature to battle, only the flexing and unflexing of the cat's sharp talons as they test them on my trousers, sometimes sticking. What does she think as she sits at the piano? Does she think of me? Is she still trying to impress me, like the first time she played Beethoven's Pathétique in my presence and stopped halfway through because she wasn't sure she could finish it without making a mistake? She didn't know yet. I find her mistakes to be charming entrances into her psyche. Or does she think of someone else? I stop myself from thinking about this any further. In fidelity, there are never two of you alone together. I'll stop there. I think that's enough.
Thank you so much. That was lovely. And I wanted to get inside of the apartment and understand the way in which Scaffolding shows us sort of life in progress and going on in the apartment, and gives us a chance to inhabit the minds of our characters as they think through, their ways of living and being together. And I loved the combination that you often have with the Henry and Florence chapter of having music or thinking about music be a parallel to thinking about their relationship in some way. And I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about Satie and the other musical references that are here and how they become a parallel to thinking.
Oh, that's such a great question. God, where to start? Yeah, well, Florence is an interesting pianist because she wanted to be a concert pianist. She wanted to study it, really assiduously at the conservatory, but her father wouldn't let her. He told her that she had to, get a proper education and then a job that was going to enable her to support herself. So in some ways, he was a forward-thinking man, but, not in others, in terms of not encouraging her to pursue her dreams. And Henry is sort of okay with that because it means she just plays the piano really well, and she doesn't go off on world tours or anything. She doesn't take nights off. She's always there to make his dinner, and she's just a really good pianist, so it's nice to listen to. But then as their relationship develops over the course of their section of the novel, which is kind of like a novella in and of itself, a self-sufficient section, as he begins to suspect that she may be stepping out on him, that there might be another man in the picture, he stops kind of idealizing her piano playing and seeing it as oh, it's so beautiful, like a woman putting up her hair. And he's like, actually, she's not very good. She's not a great pianist, is she? And he starts to get really kind of irritated by her airs and graces, and sort of can't stand her playing the piano and needs to go out, but feels like he can't go out because it would be kind of a antisocial thing to do in a marriage, to just walk out in the middle of the evening. So the piano ends up being a kind of prison for him, where in the beginning it's this sort of conduit to marital bliss. So yeah.
Oh, that's so nicely put. So the shadow figure in the background of every debate and conversation, every intimacy, physical and otherwise, in Scaffolding is Jacques Lacan, the famed psychoanalyst and inheritor and radical reinventor of Freudian techniques and theory. Anna has studied Lacan. Jonathan's father has committed a life of research to his work, and Florence attends his seminars. What about Lacan makes him the philosophical thread that connects these characters across time?
I have joked when people ask me similar questions about Lacan that I really just wanted to write a book about Lacan, but I didn't feel like I had the qualification.
I felt it for real.
And also, if I wrote a proper book about Lacan, like I'd have to read all of Lacan and really like try to understand it. See, this was a kind of way of writing about Lacan, like, without having to devote my entire life to becoming a Lacanian.
You know the novelist Brandon Taylor?
I do, yeah.
He has a great phrasing of what he did one summer, which he called his hot Freudian summer. And so you could have a hot Lacanian summer and just read all of Lacan and then, come back to it.
I don't know if a summer would be enough. It's slow going. And there's so many seminars. I mean, like Brandon Taylor took like 2 years to read the entire Hugo Macaf. And that's like, is that 20? Something like 20 novels? So yeah, I think I would need more time. I need a hot couple of years. I'm just doing that. But I really love Lacan. And I really shouldn't. Like, I should just find him this, like, big old misogynist, like, former Catholic, like, kind of, like, tyrant in his way. But I don't. I find him, like, wonderfully inspiring and full of self-doubt. And he opens lots of different doorways in my brain. So I'm just really into Lacan. Like, against all expectations, I did not think that, like, I remember reading him in a grad seminar, and it like fell to me to do the presentation that day of the Mirror Stage essay. And I felt like very tentatively like, I actually think he's right. And this is all really interesting. And so I, trotted out my reading of it to my graduate seminar, and everyone was like, yeah, it sounds like you've understood Lacan. So I like pat myself on the back. But yeah, that's just this idea that like we are brought into being as subjects and into language, into individuality through that originary moment of separation from our mothers. I just found like, so it was like everything is in that idea, this idea of like our being forever animated and driven by lack, like always trying to get back something that we felt made us whole. And I read about it in this book. You see it from like Plato to like, I don't know, Tinder. Like it drives effortless life.
Plato to Tinder is the name of your Lacanian book.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, there's like obviously theories about castration and desire, and you could be at it for hours. So I don't know. I felt like that was a really interesting way to approach characters and infidelity and desire in a kind of novelistic setting. This idea that like you have this psychoanalyst who knows her Lacan, but can't like learn it with her heart. She knows that her life is just going to be one long succession of like, trying to replace that originary loss with one thing or another, with like boys or girls or new kitchens or new shoes or whatever. And it's never going to be enough. A new therapist, another new therapist. And you can never get to the bottom of it. You can never get rid of it. So I think there's something kind of wonderful about that, the idea that we could just accept that. We can just be like, that's just how it is. And I can feel so much better about my desire or my feelings of lack or insufficiency or being a total fraud talking about like, just this idea that like we're just all in it together, like missing our mommies and wanting to be whole again. And that's just how life is.
I mean, I lost my mom not too many years ago, and so that it just feels so true. Like you have the originary lack, and then you get the secondary lack, and it's you're searching madly to, figure out how to fill it. And I was just talking to Emma Patti for an interview, who wrote a forthcoming novel that you really should read called Tilt. But she said, we all write novels or books to impress our mothers. And I think and my book is dedicated to my mom. And so, I guess I'm all kind of a Lacanian without realizing it.
Yeah, we all are.
But there is a sense in Lacan, and I think this was true for Freud, although he's even more problematic. But that there is a way of stating something about our interior lives, the things that are we think hidden away from others, that they say in a way that then becomes so commonplace to our understanding of the world, and yet it wasn't until they said it in a certain way. And that's, for me, what's amazing about those folks, even when, I want to have issues with them.
Yeah, completely. So
can we suppress our desires? Are there situations and arrangements in which we're morally compelled to turn our way away from our desires? Scaffolding is a book-length conversation, often between Anna and Clémentine, on this very question. Each character approaches and retreats from a position on which desire lives in the complication of our interdependency with others. Can you talk about how, one, Lacan treats this problem in his seminars and the ones you know, and then how you think of your novel as its own kind of interrogation of this impossible to answer question?
Well, Lacan thinks you don't give in. Like, Lacan thinks you recognize it, that these are the kind of compulsions that you're driven to repeat and, recur throughout your life, and that you can kind of recognize them. And even if not with your conscious mind, with, somehow your unconscious can accept that you're just repeating the same drives, enacting them over and over. And you can make peace with that and leave them alone and not act on them. What I was trying to do in Scaffolding is take the idea of morality out of the question, because I think Lacan was still sort of beholden to his Catholic upbringing and
dies hard.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. It's fine. He wanted to be a priest at one point. It's fine. He's not going to be the master of everything and know everything, which is he might, get himself that way. So I thought it was maybe the job of these two contemporary women, one psychoanalyst and one queer activist, burgeoning art historian, to think about how can we take morality out of the question, but still sort of be thinking about an ethical way of living with ourselves and with each other. And I don't feel like I come down on any one place. I don't feel like Anna and Clémentine have particularly entrenched ideas one way or the other. I think the novel is Anna's sort of attempt to figure out what she can live with. She is processing a recent miscarriage when the novel opens, but it's not just, the loss of her baby that's got her kind of sideways. She's just, it's like a kind of lifetime of suppressed trauma. It's just sort of coming to the fore at this particular moment. And she's, acting in a way that, from a moral perspective, a wife certainly should not act. She has certain responsibilities to her husband, to be truthful and honest and faithful to him, because those are the expectations of their relationship. But he's out of the picture. And so she is kind of giving herself this new framework to let her body do what it wants to do and not to judge it too much, and just to kind of observe it and see what happens with, one person and then with another person. I don't want to give too much away. And Clémentine, it's so funny. There's a really key moment in the novel that might seem like a kind of quiet moment, but it's when Clémentine goes to visit Anna in London, and they go to the National Gallery and they look at the Hans Holbein painting, The Ambassadors.
Oh, yeah.
And Clémentine does her best version of John Berger's reading of the painting, and Anna does her best account of Lacan's reading of the painting. And then they're very satisfied with themselves and they go home. And Anna's later thinking why weren't we just looking at the painting ourselves? Why did we have to read it through the perspective of these great men who taught us how to think or taught us how to see? We haven't finished learning how to think and how to see. We're still so set in the frameworks they developed for us. And so I think that's what they're trying to do together, is figure out how to see with their own eyes instead of always looking at things through some sort of previously evolved theoretical framework.
Oh, I love that.
Shh. Hear that? Big waves are calling. Dive into refreshment with Kona Big Wave. Tropical flavor and the taste of aloha in every drop. This summer, don't just listen. Join Kona on the Big Wave Bonfire Tour. More information at konabigwave.com/bigwavemusic. Kona Big Wave. Liquid aloha. Copyright 2025 Kona Brewing Co., St. Louis, Missouri. Mahalo for enjoying responsibly.
So good, so good, so good.
Ready to rack to school and save big? Get to your Nordstrom Rack store today for thousands of deals from just $20.
Because I want to look fresh.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
I got a new backpack.
Score everyone's favorite denim, sneakers, boots, and activewear from Nike, Levi's, Steve Madden, Madewell, and Free People. Great brands, great prices. Everyone's got a reason to rack. Shop Nordstrom Rack and make it the best school year ever.
And I as you were talking, I was thinking that the conversations that Anna and Clémentine have are an alternate, not necessarily superior, but alternate form to the therapy that or psychoanalysis that Anna's having, and that at times feels much more productive, maybe for exactly the reasons you're talking about, them coming to an understanding of how they need not filter themselves through these other thinkers, but can come to their own conclusions. Did you think at all about their having talk therapy too?
Yeah, definitely. Because it's clear that Anna's kind of fighting her own therapy. Like when she has the sessions with Esther, she's trying to perform what a good therapist she is. And she really doesn't want to talk about the affair that she's having. She's not like entirely in bad faith. Like she is trying to think about like David in the kitchen and what it all means. But there's some kind of block there. And with Clémentine, yeah, that block isn't there. She's just this random new person who's dropped into Anna's life, who has very strong opinions and who like can help Anna get outside of herself because of those kind of very frank, Clémentine says things like, "Have you read Deleuze and Guattari?" And like, no one says that. Like the assumption is
you were in grad school, grad students say that, but no one outside of grad school should ever really say that.
No, exactly. Like whether or not you're someone who like is in who has gone to grad school or not, like that's just not a question that you ever ask.
No.
You either assume the person has or you assume that they have not. So Clémentine has this kind of very forthright, like unfiltered, like let's just talk about stuff. And I think that's really useful for Anna. It lets her like get out of her head a little bit.
And one of the things that's so compelling and that it, at least for a moment, draws Anna out of a certain kind of solipsism is Clémentine's just externalized and very active form of feminism. And feminism as thought and language and action. And the more that their friendship grows closer and blurs in some ways, the more that Anna becomes, I think, sort of obsessed with what Clémentine is doing with this activist theory. And then in the novel's past of 1972, Florence questions whether a new wave of feminism has given her license to explore desire outside of marriage, a different kind of activism. And I wonder how you think about the externalization of these conversations that are had into action, and what, in particular, how Clémentine and Florence are able to enact them.
With Clémentine, it's sort of testing the idea of whether or not you do actually have to like leave your house and go out of your safe zone to make a difference in the world. I think this is something that I think about a lot, in my own life. Like I have a small child and various other constraints that mean, I'm not like out every Saturday protesting against the war in Gaza, even though I would like to be. It just doesn't seem feasible for me at this point in my life. And so I'm trying to devote my energies to like writing and, whatever kind of conversations I have with people and hope that can be my kind of intervention in the world on the side of right. And so I think for Anna, she has previously seen working with her patients as a way of intervening, ethically in the world and trying to help people process what they've been through. Clémentine is really the first person who says to her, like, but do you think that psychoanalysis can actually change the world? Like, are you actually doing anything? And Anna's like, but yeah, like, because, the world is made up of people. And if you work person by person, you might, make the world a better place. But Clémentine isn't convinced. I think she thinks that the project of psychoanalysis, and maybe she thinks my project of writing, is like fated to like just be this individualistic, slightly capitalistic enterprise. whereas she's, out in the street at night doing its illegal thing to try to like surprise people or wake them up or make them think differently about the world. And Florence she's so different to Clémentine, obviously. She's much more sheltered. She doesn't have the history of like feminist protest movements behind her. I don't think she knows much about, movements in the US in the early 20th century or in France that got women to vote. I think she just kind of stumbles upon this group of feminists through her friends at university and during the May 68 protests and thinks like, wow, this idea of solidarity, it's so interesting. And, she's like a very naive activist and she really wants to do more. But for her kind of, her way of like trying to overthrow the patriarchy is like in her own house. And then obviously she goes on to become a psychoanalyst. So she's probably more aligned with Anna in that respect.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but that seems right to me. You note that the signs that are produced by Clémentine in the book are real and include things like daddy killed mommy and what good is it to be alive if we have to live on our knees. And I wonder how you first encountered these signs and how does violence against women inflect some of the questions you're asking or engaging with around feminism and desire in the novel?
So I first came upon those signs, in 2019 when the couleuses, the activist women who put them up, started hanging them up all over Paris. They just started appearing. It was like, you're used to street art in Paris. There's all these great kind of famous graffiti artists that put the same little like speedy graffito in different places. But this was new. This was like political and feminist and so exciting. And so that came into the novel towards the very end of the first draft. I was writing the section where Anna goes for a very long walk in Paris. And by that point, I was living in London. And I was sort of trying to like imagine in my mind where she'd be walking along the way, like from Belleville, like where's she headed? Where's she going to go? What is she looking at? What does she see? And I just included one of the slogans on the walls as if it were just something that she was walking past. And then when I was reading that section over, I was like, oh, that's really interesting that kind of floated to the surface for me. Because at that point, still by the end of that draft, I wasn't totally sure when it was happening. I knew it was set like after the attacks in 2015. I knew it was going to be before the pandemic, but where in that like 2016 to 2019 spread, I had kind of left it a little bit hazy. But once I realized that the couleuses were going to be this kind of presence in the novel, under their posters would be sort of throughout the novel, I was like, okay, this helps me understand that it's 2019. There's an epidemic of violence against women in France as elsewhere. It's something that people are really starting to talk about. That's when Clémentine became an activist. Before that, she was just like kind of lost, like modeling and wanting to do her PhD in art history, but not doing much of anything. So it was a really important moment for the novel. It kind of sharpened it. It came into focus. And it seems like, I think, the unconscious of the novel was thinking about the way that we live together, how we get along in our intimate lives. And the collages that the couleuses put up are the kind of flip side of that. What happens when we can't live together? What's like the very worst case scenario is, these women being murdered by their significant others, by their intimate partners. So it kind of filled out the book's preoccupation in a way.
Yeah, I was not familiar with that movement, but it certainly made me very interested to know more. And given that there seems no end to global misogyny, it'll be a question that people keep returning to in ways in which they think about, how is this a question for, private, intimate conversations, and how is this a public solidarity to change understanding? This is a very hard pivot, but I don't want to let you go without hearing a little bit about some things that you've been reading recently and that maybe you'd like to recommend to my listeners.
Well, that's both an easy question and a hard question because I just read all the time, and I've just finished writing a book about singing, and I used to be a singer, and so I wrote a book about training as a singer in the 1990s. And so it's sort of about women's voices, like history of women's singing voices, but also sort of filtered through my 1990s. So most of the stuff that I've been reading is very targeted to that. So I read like an amazing short story by Italo Calvino called A King Listens, which is in a collection called Under the Jaguar Sun, which is just an astounding short story of this like king who's on his throne and he can't move because like the minute you get off the throne, someone else is going to come and take it and put you in prison. So it's very much a story about power, but it's about how he experiences his day through listening to the sounds of the palace and the sounds of the city outside. And at one point he hears a woman singing like far off. And that is just, it's a really kind of key moment in the story where he goes from being like sort of a prisoner of his own power to imagining a way towards freedom. It's not clear what happens at the end of the story. It may just be that he just sits on the throne the whole time. But it's really beautiful. And I hadn't read it previously when I came across it.
But
he's one of my favorites.
I don't know that story. Yeah.
And I'd never even heard of this collection, Under the Jaguar Sun. So
came out
that I just finished reading is Garth Greenwell's new one. It's called Small Rain. It's ostensibly about this man who's kind of autofictional double, I think, for Greenwell, who has this kind of unexpected medical episode. He has like a ruptured aorta or something. And it's just about his experience going to the hospital and being admitted and having lots of doctors and nurses poking and prodding at him and trying to, he's treating him like a medical mystery. But it's about also this kind of like unexpected moments of connection and humanity that you can have in those kinds of institutional settings. It's a lot about like poetry. There's some really beautiful passages about poetry and music. And it's just a very life-affirming book. I just read it sort of consecutively in like 3 or 4 nights just before bedtime. And it just felt like a heart-enlarging book. It was also really interesting the way that Garth writes about the body and the sort of difficulty of conveying physical experience in language or, getting someone else to understand what you're going through. And it's also a very kind of topical, timely book about like, it was written during the pandemic, or it takes place anyway during the pandemic. And it's just about the sort of ways that we live together and the way politics gets sort of involved and prevents people from really respecting each other's humanity, especially in the context of the pandemic and all of the sort of nonsense or vaccines and whether or not the pandemic was actually real and were there really all these people in hospitals dying. Yeah, it's just it's a very like, it's a book that feels very much of its moment and very invested in what's happening right now or what has been happening over the past 5 years. Yeah, it was really, I love Garth's work in general, but I was really impressed by this book.
I haven't read him, but my understanding from talking to people is that he's also just like an incredible person in the writing community and that he is sort of deeply empathetic and really wanting to engender this sense of community at a time where politics seems to have eliminated the possibility for certain kinds of relationships. So I'm interested in him also as a person who seems to reflect something of what you're describing in it. I also want to recommend, as it will probably be an odd corollary, as it is like chaotic and nervy and very different from what Small Rain sounds like. But I just recently interviewed Joseph Earl Thomas, who wrote God Bless You, Otis Spunkmeyer, which takes place largely in a hospital, a guy who's come back from a tour of duty in the Middle East. And he's an EMT medic, hospital worker. And it's just about an institution that's super dysfunctional and failing, but finding humanity and extraordinary connections in those times. And it's also written with one of the most unique and kind of high-paced narratives and voices that I've read in a long time.
Oh, that sounds great.
No, so that's my recommendation. And do you have any others for us, Lauren?
It's a really good question. I think I'm sort of in between projects at the moment and trying to sort of get my head on straight. So I'm sort of reading stuff that publishers send me. Like I've started reading Catherine Lacey's new one, the Mobius book, which is a really interesting kind of experiment in fiction and essay writing. It's a book that can be read you can start it from either side. Like you can pick it up and read it from the back to the front or from the front to the back. And one side is a kind of fiction and the other side is it's a kind of essay. And I'm really enjoying, I've started out from the essay side. And then I've been reading a lot of Elizabeth Bowen because I don't know, I guess I'm going into the paperback launch of Scaffolding here. And so I'm trying to reconnect with Bowen, but this time around as a writer rather than, an academic, which I was the first time I was really engrossed in her. And so I've been reading her essay collection, The Mulberry Tree, which I remember like being kind of obsessed with, 15 years ago. But now it's great. There's an essay. God, what is this essay called? Something like, Notes on Writing a Novel. And she just, it's like a little MFA in creative writing just in one essay. And, I don't agree with everything she says, but she says amazing things like you can't invent a face. Like you can't imagine like out of nowhere what a character's face is going to look like. It's always sort of bits and pieces of real people.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. It feels true, even if it's made up of certain assumptions.
And then I realized as I was looking back at Garth's book, I paged back to the beginning to remind myself why I love this book, to talk to you about it. And his epigraph is from Elizabeth Bowen, From the Heat of the Day. But it all feels...
It's all wrapping around.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to give one more of my own recommendations, which I don't usually do, because last night I saw the premiere of the film adaptation of Sigrid Nunez's The Friend. I don't know if you...
Oh my God. Yeah, I love that book. I love her.
I love her and I adore that book. I'm not even a dog person, and I find that book to be so just utterly devastating and wonderful and clever and quiet and tender. But the movie is very good. It stars Naomi Watts and Bill Murray.
Oh my God.
It's very, very good. So
I'm so excited.
Seek it out. It's open in New York City the 28th of March, and I think soon after worldwide in like early April. So
great.
Be on the lookout.
I'll look forward to it.
At the Odeon. No, you're in London, so wherever.
I'm in London, yeah. I'll probably stream it. Haven't been to your movie in many years. Oh, well, my Sigrid Nunez recommendation is always her book about Leonard Woolf's Marmoset Mitts, which is just a jewel of a book.
Oh, wow.
Perfect little book.
Oh, wow. It's a companion piece to The Friend.
Animals.
Well, and she was at this premiere talking with Eleanor Henderson, who's a friend and colleague of mine, and she just talked so beautifully about the animal actor who they cast first before anyone else. And they said, "Oh, does it have to be a Great Dane?" And she said, "Yeah, it has to be a Great Dane." And they were like,
"Obviously."
Well, because they're very lazy. And she was like, "What does that mean?" And she said, "Well, after they do their set piece for the movie, they'll just go to sleep." And it was like, "Well, what do actors do? They don't like go catch a show at the Met. They like have a nap after." And I thought it was so great and such a great defense of it. But she said, indeed, that this particular Great Dane was incredibly smart and lovely, and that Naomi Watts had to live with this Great Dane for like a month, I think, to kind of have develop a actorly relationship with the dog, as you do. But it's the dog's on-screen performance is beautiful and uncanny.
I love that. Well, I look forward to seeing it.
Yeah, well, I want to leave my audience with just every desire to run out and get Scaffolding. Sounds like it's coming out in paperback soon. Is that right?
Yeah, in June in the UK, and I'm assuming in like September in the US.
Okay, well, we'll buy the hardcover now. I mean, it's available now from your independent bookstores. It is just a wonderful mix of a philosophical novel about everything, about how we interact with one another and how we choose to desire things and limit our desires. But it's also just a wonderful story of friendship, lovers, connections, and so much more. So please run out and get Lauren Elkin's Scaffolding. And Lauren, it was such a pleasure to get to talk to you.
Oh, thanks. Likewise. Thank you so much for your really kind words about the book, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's all for me for now. My thanks to Lauren Elkin for coming on to talk about her latest, Scaffolding. You can find links to purchase Scaffolding and all of Lauren's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.